Back here now on the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast to get into this interesting narrative reporting sort of facts-based story that I came across that has, I think, a few people talking in the NFL so far on this topic so far, right? If you look at it, the scoring in the NFL, right? Through all the changes we've seen to produce more points in the NFL, right, to grow it a bit more on the offensive side and have these back and forth battles that, culminate everybody. The changes to sort of promote that, you look at the changes to the rules to sort of protect quarterbacks, the hits that are now allowed compared to like 20, 15 years ago, obviously. The hip drop tackles is another one. And I feel like it's stingier. Like the play calls, the penalty calls, I should have said, are a bit stingier for the defenses than they are for the offense. And again, all in an effort to try and promote the offense, right? I don't think that's any secret, but through all of that, the data still shows that the offense and the scoring has been down drastically this year. And it's caught a lot of people by surprise, including myself, because if you look at the stats now that I will read out to you guys, you look at the teams so far this year in the NFL, they're averaging 21.4 points per game. And you look at a few years ago, in 2020, the average points per game that year in the NFL was 24.8, so we've seen a decrease there. Also, you look at the yards per game so far this year, it's averaging around to 318 yards per game this year, and in 2020 again, the average that year was about 359, another decrease. And we're going to bring up and we're going to talk a lot in this segment about cover 2. And again, if you're very unfamiliar to that, if you have no idea what I'm talking about, cover 2 or 2 high is basically just this defensive formation, this look on defense, right? For the defense, whichever team is defending on that drive. It's basically this look, right? If you're looking over at a screenshot of the field, it's just basically when you have 2 high safeties behind everybody else on the defense, just standing pretty far from the line of scrimmage, just covering essentially one half of the field, right? If you split it down the middle long ways, that's their sort of assignments, right? They're the 2 high safeties, the cover 2, right, on that play. So that's what I mean by when you hear me say cover 2 or 2 high. It does play a lot to do in this topic, and I'll explain why. But some of the stats around offenses going against cover 2 this year compared to 2020 are as followed that I thought were pretty interesting. You look at the average depth of throw against cover 2 in 2020. The average depth of throw was 7.8 yards in 2020, and now looking at it this year, now the average depth of those throws are about 6.6 yards. So not that big of a decrease, but still a decrease nonetheless. Then also, now offenses are throwing the ball 1.9 yards short of the first down marker versus cover 2. That was back in 2020. They threw it about 2 yards shy of the first down markers against that defensive coverage. And now it's up to 3.2, decreasing how far they're willing to throw, right, in 2024. And the one that's most surprising is that in 2020, 11.6% of passes traveled at least 20 yards in the air in 2020, and now in this year, it's dropped to only 9% of the passes that travel at least 20 yards against cover 2. And why am I talking about that so much? What does that have to do in this scenario, in this discussion about scoring? Well, ESPN's Mel Kiper had a great discussion this morning that I was watching on the idea of cover 2 and just how defenses are sort of overdoing it on the defensive side of the ball with cover 2, right? Mentioning how the 2 safeties are too far back, right? Because usually you don't want to give up anything behind you, right? You want to stay pretty relatively far back, but his whole point was that they are too far back, right? It almost looks like there's 9 guys out there rather than the full 11. So he suggested that there should be a rule to kind of force them closer, to kind of bring back some of the deep passes, encourage some more throws down the field, attacking those defenses rather than just having 2 safeties kind of sit back there, right? That was his whole point, right? But I kind of see how it's not necessarily great for the NFL to see a drop in scoring because that's what they've been trying to sort of promote, increase, and at least the more exciting games draws more people in, right? Obviously, that's what the NFL wants in trying to expand the game. But I don't necessarily agree with the fact that it's like an awful thing, like it's the last thing we want to see happen. And here's why, right? Um, well, first I'm going to explain why there's been a change in my opinion, right? Why I feel like the scoring and why the defenses, instead of maybe looking worse or looking more, I guess, vulnerable with how the NFL has been trying to push offenses, why they're sort of, bunkering down now and holding strong, at least at the start of this year, is because I feel like the quarterbacks, right, the star of the show, have changed as much as any position as we go through the years, and especially how they're brought up through college, right? Because we no longer have the older style of quarterbacks like still Aaron Rodgers, Big Ben, Drew Brees, Tom Brady, Peyton Manning, these guys, right? These middle to low athletic quarterbacks, but just masters of reading defenses, cerebral, and learning the game like that, right? That's all to do with them. And now you look at the transition into the new group of quarterbacks. Now you have Josh Allen, Patrick Mahomes, and Lamar Jackson, right? That's the peak of the top tier quarterbacks now. And you see how different it is to, Peyton, Tom, and Big Ben and all those guys, right? That's a big change already. And I think that has a lot to do with it because those guys are the peak. It doesn't really necessarily encapsulate everything. Like the majority of quarterbacks now, I think, compared to before, are a lot more reliant on their athleticism, a lot more reliant on quick reads, short throws, and having it work out a lot more for them in college. And then once they get into the NFL, you see a lot more struggling. And, they're labeled busts or they're labeled like they're not able to read a defense. And yeah, that could be true, but it's not like they can't learn. And I think that's where some of the problem lies. And I have a comment here, shots below the belt. Modern NFL offenses have devalued the running back position. Having a great running game opens up the passing game immensely. And quarterbacks today are blitzed more because of a lack of the running game. I was going to mention the running game also. So just hold that thought here for a second because I do agree with you. The devaluing of running backs is certainly a fact of the matter now in the NFL, but it could be making a comeback soon, and I'll explain why in just a few moments, right? But to just go through, the progression of all of this, right? It goes back to college, I think, because a lot of these quarterbacks, everything obviously in college is slower, not as many tough throws through pockets of zone defenses, right, that you have to do in college. The first read is usually the one that's open. A lot of times for these big programs, they have good coordinators, so that first read is usually open, making it easier for the quarterbacks to go through their progressions. If they go to their first one and it's open, it looks efficient, but they're not necessarily going through the entire picture, right, if that makes sense. Not many, also now with NIL and transferring and all of that stuff, not a lot spend more than a year, if at best two, at one school, develop and kind of earn their spot. A lot just go through programs, and once they get a starting spot, they play well, and then they move on to the NFL, right? All of that doesn't necessarily help them once they make the move up to the NFL, right? Because now defenses are well equipped to combat the tendencies that these young quarterbacks have and that they're coming in with as well, right? I go back to those first read sort of things, and now defenses are a lot smarter. They're very deceptive, right? They show you one look, and then once the ball is snapped and they switch to something completely different, you might go to your first read that worked against the, let's say, cover 3 that they're in or cover 4, and then they change it to cover 2. Now the quarterback is looking at them like lost in a sense, right? They try to look at anywhere else. They might hold the ball too long, and then that's when you get this narrative build up around these quarterbacks, right? That they take bad sacks, they take unnecessary sacks, and it is true, but also it has to do with the fact that they just haven't done it that much in college, right? They're not used to reading defenses, right? And the biggest point also with this is that why this leads to the lowering of points now in the NFL, right, is because big plays that way now go away. It leads to longer drives for these young rookie quarterbacks and really any quarterbacks, right, in the NFL. Now I think we're starting to see longer drives, and they're obviously harder to do, right? If you're having to string 8, 9, 10 play drives, it's hard to do that consistency throughout an entire game rather than in college where you see like Alabama, Georgia, Ohio State hitting these big plays at least like 5 times against whoever college they play, not the level of defenses obviously you see in the NFL, and it goes quicker, right? They rack up the points and then, they go sit on the bench and that's it. In the NFL now, I think what we're seeing is defenses, right now you bring in that cover two that I mentioned before. They're willing to give you all the short throws and make these young quarterbacks go through longer drives because they know that's something they haven't really done in college. So now doing it at this level, they might do it for a drive, maybe even two, but once they get later in the game, defenses sort of understand what they're trying to do, then it kind of dies off, right? They're not able to sustain these long drives unless you have the running aspect of it now. And that's why I mentioned the running game sort of coming back, right? Because you look at the most successful teams in this low scoring year, right? You look at the teams that are most successful right now through these first 2 weeks. You got the Saints, the Vikings, the 49ers also to an extent, and the Green Bay Packers, right? This Shanahan, McVay sort of offense that usually establishes the entire offense, like you said, through the running game, right? If they're playing cover two so much, and like Mel Kiper said, they're way far back preventing any sort of deep throw, that means there's less people in the box, right? And that's where you see games where the Saints are running all over the Cowboys, right? Where they don't have the personnel. They might be playing with like 5 or 6 defensive backs in their defense, so the Saints take advantage of it. And then once they do that, once they start running the ball and you need to get more people in the box, then you fake it to Camaro, you roll out, and everybody's over pursuing, and that's where you get the big throws down the field. And that's where I think my biggest issue with, I guess, Mel Kiper saying that cover two needs to be, altered in a way, is the fact that I just feel like not enough teams now are countering what defenses are doing, right? You always hear take what the defense gives you. I think too many teams are doing that now rather than saying, all right, this is what they're going to give us. Well, they're going to be weak in this other area, right? Let's try to manipulate it. Let's try to counter that with doing this other play or this other motion, and let's have the defense react to us, right? Rather than the offense just giving in to whatever the defense shows them. And that way, it's more of a chess match, right? I think it's a lot more interesting that way. And that's my biggest point in sharing this segment, is that I think now it's just more sophisticated, and I think now it requires more of a command, more of a strategy, more of a game plan that guys like Clint Kubiak are showing you with the Saints, or Kevin O'Connell, obviously Kyle Shanahan, Matt LaFleur. All these guys are very meticulous in their game plan and what they do, and that's why they're labeled like geniuses, right? Where there's more anticipation, there's more, I'm going to sacrifice this, but I'm going to gain it somewhere else, right? And that way it's more of a duel in a sense, right? And I think it makes it a lot better. It brings the running backs more back into the NFL. And cover two is not impossible to beat, right? That's the root of all of this, right? I just think now not enough quarterbacks are making those tough throws, and not enough offenses in the NFL are able to counter what they see from the defensive side of the ball, because their quarterbacks are just not able to do it once they come out of college, right? It takes some time. And I guess that's also why you see Derek Carr, Sam Darnold, also these experienced quarterbacks now having more success, right? Because they're groomed to doing this, right? They've been taught how to do it a little bit more. And that's basically where it all kind of stems from, in my opinion, right? I feel like that's the biggest thing. Tom Brady sort of alluded to it before at, I think it was Fanatics Fest, when he said the lack of command from quarterbacks now is a lot less, and I think that supports a lot of it, right? Not a lot of quarterbacks now have the ability to counter what they see on defense, right, and try to adjust to it. Maybe they see a coverage and they say, this play's not going to work, so I'm going to counter it and audible to this other play. I think that's what's missing now with this new wave of quarterbacks. And again, I don't think this is a bad thing. Scoring obviously draws more people in, but if you're really watching it and really, I guess, appreciate defense like I sort of do, it makes it a bit more interesting, I think. And this isn't necessarily a bad thing, but that's just my opinion, right? How the scoring is down. I feel like it's going to increase now also. So we'll see how that all goes. I mean, the Saints and the Vikings and these other teams aren't really complaining. So I guess it hurts some teams and it's just going to force more teams to change, right? And that's the beauty of football, right? When it changes to one thing, then it eventually switches back to the other thing. So that is that topic on cover two and the scoring being down, right? Not necessarily being a bad thing for me, but with talking about scoring and defenses and all of that, we can get into some of the games from this upcoming weekend, predicting some of the results in these upcoming games, only half of them, and I'm going to finish the rest of them tomorrow in tomorrow's show. But for now, we're going to go through 7 games and give you guys my predictions on the winners of those matchups. So stick around. We'll be right back after this break.